This is the second lecture, is part 2. I call it more like Ode to Bobby Fischer, and to explain what Bobby Fischer's impact on myself personally was, and the world at large, and specifically in chess. In the first lecture, we had looked at Game 1 of his 1992 return match against Boris Spassky, where I demonstrated that for 50 consecutive moves in a row, Bobby played flawlessly, without mistakes. Every move was right on, and how his play was like this smooth chain of progressive moves, all leading to a finish where he had total domination, okay? Like this extraordinary style, if you will. Okay, so here's old man Bobby Fischer that Boris Spassky has just put down. And it's Game 2, and I'm in like open mouth astonishment in Seattle, still recovering from Game 1 and the fact that Bobby played 50 flawless moves after being absent from the world of chess for 20 years. I just couldn't imagine how rusty I might have been. So for this game, I had a problem. I'm not sure if it was my problem. I kind of think it was, but it might have been problem on the Yugoslav side, that somehow in terms of a telephone connection, so you and I are talking on the phone, we have a 5-minute conversation, the line gets cut, piece of cake, we hang up, we'll recall it. Yeah, did you hang up? No, I didn't hang up. Okay, the line's up, blah, 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 blah. Well, with a fax machine, if it's getting information and the line gets cut, it's like the fax didn't go. So because we're, the whole office in Seattle was like, everybody's like eyes on the fax machine and the chessboard, I had established a telephone hookup with George Stefanovich, the journalist who was in the press center. And it was like, okay, this is how we talk. Okay, Spassky has played Queen Pawn. Bobby, of course, has played King's Indian Defense. Bobby provoked Boris. Boris has sacrificed a pawn. Bobby took the pawn, of course. Boris defended well, but gave exchange to win back pawn. Bobby took exchange, and now I think he's winning. So it's like, Bobby, like 2-0. I mean, this is like unbelievable. How is he doing this? I think, is it clearly visible on your screen as it is on my screen? Bobby Fischer's rating is 2,785. Do you see that? Boris Spassky's rating is 2,560. The rating of Bobby Fischer was his rating at the time he stopped playing chess. I believe at one moment, after he defeated Bent Larsen 6-0, Bobby had an unpublished rating of 2,820. At a time, I believe that the world champion didn't have a rating of 2,700. Goes to show you like what Bobby was doing to the competition. Of course, Gary Kasparov, he was the first to break the 2,800 class. But let's be fair, his nearest rivals, whether they were Karpov or Korchnoi or Kramnik or whoever it was that he was playing against, were really, really, really close to him. So if he drew, he didn't necessarily lose a lot of rating points. I believe, I just have to check this, that when Bobby Fischer won the World Championship 12.5, 7.5, including one forfeit, he lost rating points. He lost rating points. He was supposed to beat him by a greater margin to preserve his rating. Okay, so Bobby Fischer, has inherited his old rating from the time he quit. Right? Okay, King's Indian defense. And Boris in those days, and not just in those days, but in a lot of his career, played the same-ish variation against the King's Indian. And if you look at the same-ish variation, from White's point of view, it's very aesthetically pleasing. This is a nice structure. Look at that. That's kind of pretty. And the bishop is going to come to e3, where it can't be harassed by the knight. Bishop comes to e3, bishop comes to d3, knight comes to e2, castles, and it's very aesthetically pleasing. But I like what Grandmaster Edward Gufeld said to me about such moves. He says, "Do you talk to your pieces?" Me? Do you talk? I go, "Well, yes, I do, but don't tell anybody." He says, "When you play the move f2, f3, did you ask the gentleman on g1 what he is thinking, that you've taken away his best square?" So King's Indian defense players, they try to talk down the same-ish because they really don't like playing against it. So they'll point out to you, like, your guy's very unhappy. And g1, knight g1. c5. This was almost a kind of a psychological decision. I think many people who want to play the move c5 first preface it with castles, because it's sort of like it's an offer. Do you want to go into the endgame? Yeah? Do you want to trade queens and cost me castling and go into an ending? Normally speaking, when you're black, you don't like to make such an offer to your opponent. They might accept it to begin with. On the other hand, if your approach to the same-ish, to play against the same-ish, is to play with the move c5, the problem from black's point of view is if you castle, bishop e3, and now you play the move c5, it is a pawn sacrifice, and that goes like this, with or without trading queens. And Garry Kasparov has proven in his practice that the pawn sacrifice is not dangerous for black, that he gets good play for his pawn, but it's not to everybody's taste that they want to sacrifice a pawn, gambit a pawn, I mean, as black. So, Bobby plays c5 right away, and Boris decided to take Bobby up on his offer, traded queens, bishop e3. In the immortal words of Dr. Nikolai Minev, "Gift me your pawn, gift me your pawn." Bobby says no. Knight b8, knight f6, d7, which is a very strange, kind of unconventional move to amateur eyes, beginner eyes. What are you doing with this move? Knight on f6 to d7. Why aren't you playing knight on b8 to d7? Isn't it so, Yasser? Isn't it so that you shouldn't move your pieces too often in the opening? And isn't it so that this knight is undeveloped and this knight is developed? Yes, 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 yes. But these guys are the guys who write the rules. You know, these guys are the guys who write the books. And basically what Bobby is saying in this position is this knight on f6 may be developed, but it is not effective. The knight on f6 blocks this bishop's diagonal, and maybe this knight has better uses. Maybe, if you're not watching too closely, it might jump to c6 and as well as the d4 square. Yes?
Isn't it also really good because that bishop diagonal, White's bishop can't really deal with it
Yes.
well?
Yeah, this long diagonal is not about to be challenged by the bishop on e3. That's right. Yes?
So he had no intention really of taking the knight on c3.
Well, maybe he does. Maybe he does. Maybe This bishop looks, it's a beauty, but and if you give me a free hand to let me do what I want, I would be very interested in bishop takes, b takes, b6, bishop a6, knight c6, knight a5, and gift me your pawn. So he may, on the one hand, be intimating, I'm ready to take this knight. On the other hand, he may be saying, hey, be careful, I might occupy the d4 square. Boris Spassky says, I don't want you to take my knight. I will protect my pawn, my knight. b7, b6. Again, this move kind of needs some explanation, and unfortunately, it's only after many, many, many games of Grandmaster practice do we understand that Black would love to play the move knight c6, castles, and now what Black would like to do is play the move e7, e5, and stick the knight on d4. Yeah? Then it's great. White will stick his knight on d5, the position will be balanced, and so on. The problem, of course, is that e5 is running into bishop takes c5. There's a pin on the d file. So Black is going to need to keep that pawn on c5 protected. b6, castles. Now comes the next phase. From White's point of view, he's not very happy. His pieces look okay, but you talk to your bishop on f1? Is the bishop on f1 very happy? No. The bishop says, hey man, I got nothing to look at. Oh, I know what I should do, says White. I should play g3 with the idea perhaps of bishop h3, or I should play g3, f4, e5, and put my bishop on g2, which would be multi-purpose. First it would close this diagonal and open this diagonal. So we have this move. Now, again, from Black's point of view, it's very sensible to think in terms of knight c6, knight d4. The problem with knight c6 is White first plays f4 to make the move e5 less attractive. Then he's going to play g3, and then he's going to play bishop g2. So Bobby has the following setup in mind, and we'll see it unfold in front of us. With knight a6, he's thinking that in his mind's eye, the knight would be wrong on this square. He's anticipating White playing g3, f4, e5. He wants his bishop to go to b7 and have an unobstructed view of this diagonal. Furthermore, he's a little bit worried about his king. Where should my king go? He's, in his mind eye, Bobby is determined that the best position for his king would be on the e7 square, which by definition means we got to move the pawn on e6. When we play e6, king e7, we've got to be a little bit concerned of knight b5 to d6, and the knight would be really good on d6. So with this move, knight a6, Bobby is going to play knight c7, cutting out knight b5, following it up with e6, king e7, bishop b7. Let's see how the game unfolds. g3, we understand this move because the bishop's been crying and shouting and let me into the game. Come on, coach, let me in the game. I can play. Knight c7, f4, e6, bishop h3. Now, White has to decide what is his ideal setup. I think everybody would like to play the move e4, but then after bishop b7, a tempo against the rook would go here, Black's king would go here, And the best white has is simply trading bishops. Okay? White does enjoy an advantage in space, but it will be very hard to convert that to any kind of a serious advantage. With the move bishop h3, Boris takes a completely different approach. Boris's approach is, look, Joker, you've moved your king. I'm going to try to keep as many pieces on the board as I possibly can, and I'm going to try to attack your king. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to play rook h1 to f1, followed by f7, f5, blast open this diagonal, and blast open the f file as well as the d file. Okay? King e7, rook f1, h6. Okay. So, somebody help me out here. What's the idea of h6? What is the idea of h6? Don't all shout out at once.
Well, he goes to,
Yeah.
if he pushes the e5 pawn,
Yes.
he could try to get his knight over to
e4 to
to
d6.
g5,
Also.
but that pawn defends it.
Yes. You had also an idea why he played h6?
I was thinking G5 and then F6, but it was
You were thinking about f5 and then yes.
I was thinking if White plays F5, then you can play G5.
Right. So one of the ideas is that Black can very well see. It's almost like a telegraph punch, right? That White wants to play f5. White wants to capture the pawn on g6, capture the pawn on g6, and play a move like knight f4, when both the e6 as well as g6 pawns. So Bobby's move h6, as you've correctly said, is that after f5, his intention is to play g5 and to take the square f4 away from the knight on e2, and at the same time, when White plays the move f5, isn't that a lovely square for the black knight? Black knight comes to e5. Darn it. Boris has to change because f5 would miss its mark. Final point of h6 is that if f5 does come, we also have to be worried about a bishop g5 check, right? So you take away that possibility. So e5. So now this is kind of cool from Black's point of view. From Black's point of view, he doesn't have to worry about g4 and f5 anymore because the pawn is now on e4. On the other hand, alert, you know, spoiler alert, knight e4 to d6 would be devastating. White would have a huge strategic advantage if he could do that. So we stop him. Bishop d7, g4. At this moment, I can only imagine that Spassky was feeling quite a bit frustrated. His attempts to keep the pieces on and to attack the king in the center, Soviet chess school, you know, you don't keep your king in the center, we will open the center and get your king. Well, Bobby's defying the conventional wisdom. He's kept his king in the center, and he's challenging Boris Spassky to do something about it. Boris went g4, again, with a very straightforward idea that he's going to play f5, even at the cost of sacrificing his pawn on e5. Rook d8, we all understand, developing our forces. Knight g3, warming up for the big punch of f4, f5, and once again with the idea of knight e4 and knight coming to d6. What should Bobby do? rook f8. So the idea behind the move rook f8, how are we planning on meeting knight e4? If the knight goes to e4 and then to d6, you don't need a map to understand that it's tough. Yes, young man. F5. Okay, when we play a move like f5, two thoughts should come through your mind. The first one is, could white sacrifice a piece? In other words, f5, gf, gf, bishop takes f5, e takes f5, knight takes f5 check, king moves. You have to calculate. The second one you have to calculate is, what about f5 takes knight h5? Where are you going to move your bishop? Are you willing to trade, give up your minor pair and allow your opponents to win the two bishops? Right idea. Right idea. Just go to f6. So the idea of Bobby's here with the move f6 is very simple. This knight coming to d6 is simply too powerful, so we stop it. That's all. If white trades, knight takes, the move g5 we don't worry about because the bishop on h3 is going to be hanging. Okay? So f6 to blunt white's attack. Knight e4, Boris is not going to be denied, takes f5. So this is like my conversation with George Stavanovich. Bobby has provoked Boris. He has won a pawn. Bobby took, of course, the pawn. But we should be worried, right? I mean, there's a storm brewing around black's position. And for example, if we did something conventional like e takes, g f5, g5, we got to be worried about moves like f6 check, followed by knight f5 check. So there are some very serious threats. So how did Bobby meet these threats? I mean, it's coming. What did Bobby Fischer play? Okay, so let's see. So g5, one thing I would be concerned about if I was black, if I played the move g5, am I sure I can handle rook takes d7 check and f6? Yeah, I could take back with a king. That looks okay. So maybe after g5, maybe I should be fearful of f5 takes e6 with the knight coming to f5. Have you figured it out? What should black do? Not sure? Come on. He has captured. Bishop takes e4. It's the most conventional wisdom in the world is that when you're under attack, you want to trade off your opponent's attacking pieces. And this bishop on b7 is a beautiful bishop. You really don't want to give it up needlessly, but in this case, there was a need.
Knight on e4 is pretty good too.
Pretty good. Knight takes e4. This was I blew it. I wanted to ask you guys, this was a really cool capture. G takes, and Bobby knight f6. Okay. I mean, at the moment, he's still a pawn up. He's still, hanging on to that pawn. And in the meantime, if white, were to play knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, takes on e6, knight takes e6, black's doing fine. He's ready to jump to d4 with the knight, or perhaps to play bishop g5. rook g8, rook g1, pardon me, attacking the bishop on g7. Check. Annoying. You can almost feel Boris Spassky venting his frustration. King takes g7. And now, what do you think? Is white better, or what should black do? What should black do?
Black take the open file.
Okay, so for example, after say a move like rook check, let's say king e2, we have we still have to deal with some issues over here. One thing that we could think about perhaps is play the move knight takes e4 and just question. After knight takes e4, rook takes g7 check, king comes to d6, and just question white whether his two bishops and active rook are full compensation for the pawn. That's one possibility. We could go into defensive mode and play a move like rook check, king e2, and move our king. But then after takes, bishop knight takes, our pawn is going to be hanging. Bobby Fischer. Simple chess. Bishop f8. He didn't play rook check, but kept his rook on h8 for reasons we'll understand soon enough. Give me the knight on e4. Knight takes, king takes, rook f1. Okay? Pawn takes. Rook takes, check, king g7. So after all of that action that Boris was trying to create, all the attacks, what does he have left to recapture his pawn? Bishop came to d6, rook to e4, bishop takes h2. So now we start to understand, why did Bobby Fischer keep his rook on h8? Because rooks belong behind fast pawns. It's that simple. Simple chess. Rooks belong behind fast pawns. So he had foresaw the outcome. Now, white really shouldn't have too many troubles drawing this position. I mean, he's a pawn down, but the two bishops are really a powerful compensation. King e2, h5, rook e7 check, rook d7, bishop e5, b3, h4. Okay. So, of course, black has every reason to play on, but for the moment his knight is a little bit stymied. If the knight moves, the rook takes the pawn, and a draw is more or less going to be agreed. So here we are at move 32. So if you add the 50 moves from game one, essentially 82 great moves by Bobby, but it gets better. His next moves, you know, I really would think that most grandmasters, this position would end in a draw, and maybe black would only win just a tiny fraction of the time, 15% maybe. King f3, rook g8, bishop g4, h3. Ooh, that pawn is slipping through. Bishop takes h3 is met by rook g3, check, and taking the bishop.
Why do you move the bishop away from being in front of that pawn, though?
White did white? What? Sorry, I'm not sure.
White move the bishop?
Here. Now. Now. Well, he saw rook g3 check was coming, so he wanted to block the check, and at the same time Boris had the idea that he would bring his rook to h7 to get behind the passed pawn. Bishop g4, h3, rook h7. So in his mind's eye, what Boris was thinking was that in this position, he intends to play bishop f4, trade the defender of the pawn on h2 and just pick up the pawn and let's have a handshake and make a draw. Nice plan, but Bobby didn't agree. What did Bobby do to make White's life bring his knight into action? So a move like knight e6 definitely makes sense. I think this is where Bobby found a move that I hadn't considered. Sorry, bishop f4 was played. This is the move when Boris was going through all of his calculations that I think Boris reached this position in his mind eye and said, draw, draw. Because bishop takes and rook takes, or simply rook takes or bishop takes, and as the gentleman said, you know, you can bring your knight into play, but after trading everything, you'll be in a drawn rook and pawn ending, right? So Boris had seen all of this and thought draw. But what did Bobby play? Bobby has a really, really cool move right here, right now. Really, really cool move. King g6. You like king g6 as well? Okay, so what would be the idea of king g6 is that you attack the rook. If the rook takes this pawn on h2, then right. Okay. So there's this wonderful, wonderful line. I think it was attributed to Michael Tal, but I'm sure he got it from somebody else. It's like, if you see a good move, stop, think. There might be a better one. So king g6 is a good move, but stop, think. Is there a better one? And then rook David 8. Okay, so your idea is maybe to give a check, and so after rook d8, bishop takes, king takes, rook takes. Maybe you're thinking that maybe you're king. You would give a check and maybe you're king. So there's one nice idea of putting some pressure on black. Yes, young lady.
Instead of king g6 or like rook d8, rook f8.
You thinking like Bobby Fischer? Rook f8. So this sets up a real nice threat of king g6. And after bishop takes e5, king g6, check. King e4, king takes. And this is George Stefanovich. Bobby won a pawn. He kept it, of course. Bobby's won in exchange. And I think Bobby is winning. Wow. Woo. So here we are. What move number is that over there? I mean, he's putting pressure. He's doing it. He's doing it. You know, the idea that Bobby could win again. And this is, again, at a time and age where today, you know, the draw percentage amongst grandmasters is pretty high. You know, 55, 60, 65%. This is a guy who hasn't played chess in 20 years, is coming in right out of the box and playing all of these good moves. Okay, it's still very, very difficult to win for black because all the pawns are on one side, and White's king is very, very active. I mean, it may, after, for example, a line where we move our knight to a6, that king could shoot very quickly over to the queen side. Okay, check first of all. Bobby tries to take advantage of the fact that the knight, for the moment, protects the square d5, so he wants to move White's king away from the d5 square, which he successfully did. King f5. Now I think came knight e6. Okay. Why didn't Bobby play knight a6, by the way? Why would the a2, a3 would keep the knight certainly under lock and key. Knight e6, of course. So the knight heads for the center and for a square where it will be nicely anchored, protected, as we say. Knight d4. Black's moves all make a very smooth progression, yeah? Bishop d6. So the idea behind this move from the point of view of Boris Spassky, if he could just trade off all of these pawns and get into a position where it would be rook and knight versus two bishops, he reckons he might draw. So with this move, bishop d6, he's thinking that he'll be able to play a move like b4 one day, trade that, c5 one day, and so on. So bishop d6, rook here, bishop here, rook down, a4, rook b3, bishop b8, a5, bishop a7, rook takes b3, king here, knight check, king here, knight here, bishop here, rook here. Okay. So we reach the critical moment. I think king c6 was played. Literally, Bobby has played absolutely flawlessly to this moment, and another 50 moves have been played. Now, when Bobby stopped playing chess in 1975, in that period, you had what were called adjourned games. So if the game wasn't finished by, say, move 40, the game was stopped, the position was recorded, and the players sealed their move. So Bobby really hadn't been in this situation where he's now playing to a finish. So in this position, this is where Bobby let the win slip, right here. What should Fischer do? What should Bobby Fischer play? If you were black, what should Bobby Fischer play? Don't all shout at once. There is a capture in the position, right? Of course, why not? Knight takes c4. And let's see what Bobby calculated. Bishop takes c4. Rook takes c4.
Oh, is this where you played?
No. Knight takes c4, in fact, was the winning move. But Bobby got to this position in his mind's eye and saw rook takes a4, king takes c5, and Bobby knows full well that rook versus bishop is a draw, but he didn't see how he was going to hang on to his pawn. Okay, I mean, it's clear that white's just going to go king b5 and bishop takes a5. So you have to move your rook away. The king's going to go to b5. He's going to take the pawn. The pawn goes to a4. The bishop attacks the rook. Okay. Rook attack. Rook attacks bishop. Bishop to c5. And this was the move that Bobby had missed. It was. I meant to show it. Boy, I'm terrible up here in the podium. The idea was that he saw this position, he anticipated rook a1, bishop comes back, rook goes back, a repetition. He's missed this cute move, rook d5. Give the guy some credit. It's the sixth hour of play. He has played wonderful chess, got this winning position, and miscalculated. Simply put, knight c4, bishop c4, rook c4, bishop b6, rook a4, king c5, rook a1, king b5, a4 was winning for Bobby. And it would have been the fantastic culmination of a flawlessly executed game. Bobby, afraid that that variation would end in a draw, played knight b3. So his idea was that after, his idea was that after bishop takes b6, knight d4 check, king takes c5, knight takes e6. You can't, white cannot take the b6 pawn, but on the next move, Bobby had it in his mind that he was going to take the pawn on a4, return his rook to b4, and away she blows. Go, 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 the a pawn. Boris has played bishop d5, rook takes a4, bishop takes rook a1. Bobby thought that this was winning, and you can't blame him after 5-6 hours in terms of making one believe that what he didn't anticipate is that when he was going to be a whole rook ahead, but white could make a draw. He's going to be rook and knight versus bishop and pawn, but the king, white's king, is going to support the c pawn. The way the game finished was bishop takes, a4, bishop back, a3. Look at that pawn go, but look at this pawn go. White is going to have to give up one of his bishops for these pawns, but he's got enough counterplay with his c pawn. Check, king, rook takes, knight c2, double attack, c6. So you've got your choice of how you want to take, which bishop it is that you want to take, but this pawn, if you take this bishop, push. You take this bishop, king c6, and queen, making a draw. If you take this bishop, I think that's what Bobby did, I beg your pardon. Yes, if you take this bishop, bishop d6, and Boris, by the slimmest of margins, just, it's enough to make a draw. Actually, my goodness, I would really have to check if this was the final position, because I thought, for some reason, that this move was played, this move, this move. For some reason, I had it in my mind that they played two naked kings. Okay, but it's possible that the input on the, but it would be amazing that they get this wrong. I'm not sure. Okay, but that would have been how the game had ended if they didn't agree to a draw at that particular moment. So here, it was very, very astonishing that the guy hasn't played for 20 years, came back, played 100 perfect moves. You can put these two games through your chess engine and see how many, 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 many times Bobby's move was the first choice of the engine.